And we're back here at Stormer Show. What is up, Storm Champions? We were not invited to Twitch Rivals, but you know what? It's all good. This might be the smallest channel on the history of this platform, but you know what? We're still educating the masses. So there you go. Chapter 4. Crime and Punishment. Part 3. At that moment, the door was softly opened, and a young girl walked into the room, looking timidly about her. Everyone turned towards her with surprise and curiosity. At first sight, Raskolnikov did not recognize her. It was Sofia Semyonovna Marmeladov. He had seen her yesterday for the first time, but at such a moment, in such surroundings, and in such a dress, that his memory retained a very different image of her. Sofia. I think I may have accidentally called her Sonia in the past. Sofia. Yeah, I guess Sofia is her name. Now I believe she's the daughter of Marmeladov. Now she was a modestly and poorly dressed young girl. Very young indeed, almost like a child, with a modest and refined manner, with a candid but somewhat frightened looking face. She was wearing a very plain indoor dress, and had on a shabby old-fashioned hat, but she still carried a parasol. Unexpectedly finding the room full of people, she was not so much embarrassed as completely overwhelmed with shyness, like a little child. She was even about to retreat. Who all was there? Raskolnikov, Rasmus, his mom and his sister? I guess so. Oh, it's you, said Raskolnikov, extremely astonished, and he too was confused. She just shows up at his place. How did she even know where he lived? I don't know. He had once recollected that his mother and sister knew through Luzhin's letter of some young woman of notorious behavior. Yeah, I'm not even entirely sure how Peter Petrovich knew about her. I don't know, maybe he heard or saw something about Marmeladov's death. And maybe that's how he found out, but even still, it just seems strange that he knows about her. He erroneously thought that Raskolnikov gave the money that he got from his mom to her, but the reality is that he gave it to her mom. He'd only just been protesting against Luzhin's calumny and declaring that he had seen the girl last night for the first time. Calumny means making a false and defamatory statements in order to damage someone's reputation. Slander. Again, yes, I have been the victim of calumny in the past. Not too distant past as well. A false and slanderous statement. He remembered too that he had not protested against the expression of notorious behavior. All this passed vaguely and fleetingly through his brain, but looking at her more intently, he saw that the humiliated creature was so humiliated that he felt suddenly sorry for her. When she made a movement to retreat in terror, it sent a pain to his heart. I did not expect you, he said hurriedly with a look that made her stop. Yeah, how did she even know that he lived there? I don't know. Just shows up at his house. Please sit down. You come, no doubt, from Katerina Ivanovna. Allow me. Not there. Sit here. Yeah, see, and here it says, at Sonia's entrance. So maybe it's one of those, like, things where it's, like, two different names for the same character. Like, Raskolnikov's sister is the same way. Sometimes they call her Dunya. Sometimes they call her, what is it? Avdotya? Yeah, sometimes you call her Dunya, sometimes they call her Avdotya, Romanovna. who else has that? Luzhin himself has that. Sometimes he's called Peter Petrovich by Fyodor. Sometimes he's called Luzhin. I think it's like a first name, last name kind of thing. Like Luzhin's his last name. Peter Petrovich, I think, is his first and middle names. Yo, yo, yo. Let me see if I can bring it closer so I can see the chat. Got my art stand here that I can use. I actually haven't really used it all that much. I got like a whole paint set in addition to this art set that I got. And you guys might have seen some of my artwork streams. If you haven't seen them, you can check out the videos on YouTube, or actually put these together using my set. But yeah, I also got this easel that I can use, and I use it for multi-purpose. Sometimes it can also hold my camera, so it's easier to see you guys. Alright. Nice and cozy by the fire. Okay, hold on a second. Let me see if I can push it. Yeah, that's probably the best. Okay. But yeah, I haven't had a chance to really use this easel yet for canvases because the paint thinner I have, apparently it's like somewhat toxic and corrosive, and because of that I want to make sure I'm wearing the right equipment when I'm using it and that it's being stored properly. So yeah, I'm waiting to get like something I could store the paint in, the paint thinner in. But yo, what up, fours? Thank you for watching. And I appreciate the follow if you're going to follow. Don't forget to. It helps the channel. Okay. Anyway. Yes, we're reading through Crime and Punishments, Part 3, Chapter 4 now. And Marmeladov's daughter, Sonia, which strangely she's known as Sonia and Sofia, has found him. She just shows up at his house, I guess. Raskolnikov's house. Okay, let's see. Where was I? Yeah, she shows up, and apparently Raskolnikov's family's there too. Like his mom is there, his sister's there. They've reunited with him after a few years. Yeah, he's saying... Alright, yeah. I wasn't expecting you. At Sonia's entrance, Rasmussen, who had been sitting on one of Raskolnikov's 3 chairs, close to the door, got up to allow her to enter. Raskolnikov had at first shown her the place on the sofa where Zosimov had been sitting, but feeling that the sofa which served him as a bed was too familiar a place, he hurriedly motioned her to Rasmussen's chair. He spends too much time in his bed, said. You sit here, he said to Rasmussen, putting him on the sofa. So it's okay for Rasmussen to sit there, just not her. Sonia sat down, almost shaking with terror, and looked timidly at the 2 ladies. It was evidently almost inconceivable to herself that she could sit down beside them. I think that Raskolnikov's mom and sister they're not very fancy dressed. They're of pretty modest means, from what I can tell. So, maybe because of their dispositions or how their personalities seem, maybe that's why she feels more shy, but I don't think it would be the case based on how they're dressed alone. Dunya has like a bracelet that she got from Marfa Petrovna. I think it's a bracelet, but that's really the only thing that really stands out. that she has on her or that she's wearing. At the thought of it, she was so frightened that she hurriedly got up again and in utter confusion addressed Raskolnikov. I have come for 1 minute. Forgive me for disturbing you, she began falteringly. I come from Katerina Ivanovna, and she had no one to send. Katerina Ivanovna told me to beg you to be at the service in the morning at Mitrofanievsky, and then to us to her to do her honor. She told me to beg you. Sonia stammered and ceased speaking. Yeah, Marmeladov was pretty... He got along well with Raskolnikov. Before he died. Okay, I will try most certainly, answered Raskolnikov. He too stood up, and he too faltered and could not finish his sentence. Please sit down, he said suddenly. I want to talk to you. You're perhaps in a hurry, but please, be so kind. Spare me 2 minutes. And he drew up a chair for her. Sonia sat down again, and again timidly she took a hurried, frightened look at the two ladies, and dropped her eyes. Raskolnikov's pale face flushed. A shudder passed over him. His eyes glowed. Mother, he said, firmly and insistently, this is Sofia Semyonovna Marmeladov, the daughter of that unfortunate Mr. Marmeladov who was run over yesterday before my eyes, and of whom I was just telling you. Pulcheria Alexandrovna glanced at Sonia, and slightly screwed up her eyes. In spite of her embarrassment before Rodya's urgent and challenging look, she could not deny herself that satisfaction. Dunya gazed gravely and intently into the poor girl's face, scrutinized her with perplexity. Sonia, hearing herself introduced, tried to raise her eyes again, but was more embarrassed than ever. I wanted to ask you, said Raskolnikov hastily, how things were arranged yesterday. You were not worried by the police, for instance. No, that was all right. It was too evident. The cause of death. They did not worry us. Only the lodgers are angry. Probably because there was blood everywhere. Why? That the body is remaining so long. You see it is hot now, so that today they will carry it to the cemetery, into the chapel until tomorrow. How long is it before a human body starts stinking, too? Because I don't think it would have smelled that. I think it would have had a pretty bad smell. At first, Katerina Ivanovna was unwilling, but now she sees herself that it's necessary. Today, then, she begs you to do us the honor to be in the church tomorrow for the service, and then to be present at the funeral lunch. She's giving a funeral lunch? Yes, just a little. She told me to thank you very much for helping us yesterday. But for you, we should have had nothing for the funeral. All at once her lips and chin began trembling, but with an effort she controlled herself, looking down again. Yeah, it's a pretty sad family, this one. The Marmeladov family. The mom is suffering from tuberculosis, and it's probable that she's gonna die pretty soon. During the conversation, Raskolnikov watched her carefully. She had a thin, very thin, pale-up face, rather irregular and angular, with a sharp little nose and chin. She could not have been called pretty, but her blue eyes were so clear, and when they lighted up, there was such a kindliness and simplicity in her expression that one could not help being attracted. Her face and her whole figure, indeed, had another peculiar characteristic. In spite of her 18 years, she looked almost a little girl, almost a child. In some of her gestures, this childishness seemed almost absurd. But has Katerina Ivanovna been able to manage with such small means? Does she even mean to have a funeral lunch? Raskolnikov asked, persistently keeping up the conversation. The coffin will be plain, of course, and everything will be plain, so it won't cost much. I'm surprised they're having a funeral at all. Katerina Ivanovna and I have reckoned it all out, so that there will be enough left. And Katerina Ivanovna was very anxious it should be so. You know, one can't. It's a comfort to her. She's like that, you know. I understand, of course. Why do you look at my room like that? My mother has just said it's like a tomb. You gave us everything yesterday, Sonia said suddenly in reply in a loud, rapid whisper. And again she looked down in confusion. Her lips and chin were trembling once more. She had been struck at once by Raskolnikov's poor surroundings, and now these words broke out spontaneously. A silence followed. There was a light in Dunya's eyes, and even Pulcheria Alexandrovna looked kindly at Sonia. Rodya, she said, getting up. We shall have dinner together, of course. Come, Dunya. And you, Rodya, had better go for a little walk, and then rest and lie down before you come to see us. I'm afraid we have exhausted you. Yes, I'll come, he answered, getting up fussily, but I have something to see to. But surely you will have dinner together? Cried Razumhin, looking in surprise at Raskolnikov. What do you mean? Yes, I'm coming, of course. And you stay a minute. You do not want him just now, do you, Mother? Perhaps I'm taking him from you. Oh, no. And will you, Dmitri Prokofitch, do us the favor of dining with us? Please do, added Dunya. Razumhin bowed, positively radiant. For one moment they were all strangely embarrassed. Goodbye, Rodya. That is, till we meet. I do not like saying goodbye. Goodbye, Anastasia. I've said goodbye again. Pulcheria Alexandrovna meant to greet Sonia too, but it somehow failed to come off, and she went in a flutter out of the room. But Avdotya Romanovna seemed to await her turn, and followed her mother out, gave Sonia an attentive, courteous bow. Sonia, in confusion, gave a hurried, frightened curtsy. There was a look of poignant discomfort in her face, as though Avdotya Romanovna's courtesy and attention were oppressive and painful to her. Yeah, she's probably been used to some crap, to put it mildly. Dunya, goodbye, called Raskolnikov in the passage. Give me your hand. Why, I did give it to you. Have you forgotten? Said Dunya, turning warmly and awkwardly toward him. Never mind. Give it to me again. And he squeezed her fingers warmly. Dunya smiled, flushed, pulled her hand away, and went off quite happy. Come, that's capital, he said to Sonia, going back and looking brightly at her. God, give peace to the dead. The living have still to live. That's right, isn't it? Sonia looked surprised at the sudden brightness of his face. He looked at her for some moments in silence. The whole history of the dead father floated before his memory in those moments. Was that conversation really that long? I don't know. I don't think it was, but apparently it's enough for Raskolnikov to remember. I don't know. Yeah, apparently he remembers this whole conversation they had. Heavens, Dunya, Pulcheria Alexandrovna began as soon as they were in the street. I really feel relieved myself at coming away more at ease. How little did I think yesterday in the train that I could ever be glad of that. I tell you again, Mother, he's still very ill. Don't you see it? Perhaps worrying about us upset him. You must be patient, and much can be forgiven. Well, you were not very patient, Pulcheria Alexandrovna caught her up hotly and jealously. Do you know, Dunya, I was looking at you two. You're the very portrait of him, and not so much in face as in soul. You're both melancholy, both morose and hot-tempered, both haughty and both generous. Surely he can't be an egoist, Dunya, eh? When I think of what is in store for us this evening, my heart sinks. Don't be uneasy, mother. What must be will be. Dunya, only think what a position we're in. What if Peter Petrovich breaks it off? Poor Pulcheria Alexandrovna blurted out incautiously. I hardly think he will. He's Hardy said, I'll meet you guys for dinner. If Raskolnikov's there, everything's off. And they've already decided that Raskolnikov is going, so I'm pretty sure he's going to break it off. He won't be worth much if he does, answered Dunya sharply and contemptuously. We did well to come away, Pulcheria Alexandrovna hurriedly broke in. He was in a hurry about some business or the other. If he gets out and has a breath of air, he's fearfully close in his room. But where is one to get a breath of air here? The very streets here feel like shut-up rooms. Good heavens, what a town. Stay, this side. They will crush you, carrying something. Why, it is a piano they've got, I declare. How they push. I'm very much afraid of that young woman, too. What young woman, mother? Why, that Sofia Semyonovna, who was there just now. Why? I have a presentiment, Dunya. Well, you may believe it or not, but as soon as she came in that very minute, I felt that she was the chief cause of the trouble. Nothing of the sort, cried Dunya in vexation. What nonsense with your presentiments, mother. He only made her acquaintance the evening before, and he did not know her when she came in. Leave it to a mother to always blame everything else. Well, you will see. She worries me, but you will see. I was so frightened. She was gazing at me with those eyes. I could scarcely sit still in my chair when he began introducing her. Do you remember? It seems so strange, but Peter Petrovich writes like that about her. He introduces her to us, to you. So he must think a great deal of her. Yeah, I'm not even entirely sure, how Peter Petrovich even knows about her, so I don't know. I have no idea at all how he even knows any of that. People will write anything. We were talked about and written about, too. Have you forgotten? I'm sure that she's a good girl, and that is all nonsense. How does he know about her? Why would he think it important to write about her? So many questions. What would it matter to Peter Petrovich at all? I don't know. God grant it may be. Peter Petrovich is a contemptible slanderer, Dunya snapped out suddenly. Pulcheria Alexandrovna was crushed. The conversation was not resumed. So, why are you marrying him? I will tell you what I want with you, said Raskolnikov, drawing Rasmus to the window. Then I will tell Katerina Ivanovna that you are coming, Sonia said, hurriedly preparing to depart. Katerina Ivanovna. Oh, that's Marmeladov's wife, yeah. 1 minute, Sofia Semyonovna. We have no secrets. You're not in our way. I want to have another word or two with you. Listen, he turned suddenly to Rasmus again. You know that, what's his name? Porfiry Petrovich? I should think so. He's a relation. Why? Added the latter with interest. So wait, he's related to Sofia? I guess. I don't even know. Is not he managing that case, about the murder? You were speaking about it yesterday. Yes, well, Rasmussen's eyes opened wide. He was inquiring for people who would pawn things, and I have some pledges there too. Trifles. A ring my sister gave me as a keepsake when I left home, and my father's silver watch. They're only worth 5 or 6 rubles altogether. but I value them. So what am I to do now? I do not want to lose these things, especially the watch. I was quaking just now for fear Mother would ask to look at it when we spoke of Dunia's watch. So wait, what? Are these the same? I don't know, let me keep reading. It's only the thing of fathers left us. So is Dunia's watch actually given to them by the dad? They're saying it was Marfa Petrovich. Is that their dad then? Marfa Petrovich? I don't know. Marfa Petrovich. Yeah, let me keep reading. Should be ill if it were lost. You know what women are. So tell me what to do. I know I ought to have given notice at the police station, but would it not be better to go straight to Porphyry? Yeah? What do you think? The matter might be settled more quickly, you see. Mother may ask for it before dinner. Certainly not to the police station. Certainly to Porphyry, Rasmus shouted in extraordinary excitement. Well, how I'm glad. Let us go at once. It is a couple of steps. We shall be sure to find him. Very well, let us go. He will be very, very glad to make your acquaintance. I've often talked to him of you at different times. I was speaking of you yesterday. Let us go. So you knew the old woman? So that's it. It's all turning out splendidly. Oh yes, Sofia Ivanovna. Sofia Semyonovna, corrected Raskolnikov. Sofia Semyonovna, this is my friend Rasmussen, and he's a good man. If you have to go now, Sonia was begging, not looking at Rasmussen at all, and still more embarrassed. Let us go, decided Raskolnikov. I will come to you today, Sofia Semyonovna. Only tell me where you live. He was not exactly ill at ease, but seemed hurried and avoided her eyes. Sonia gave her address and flushed as she did so. They all went out together. Don't you lock up? Asked Rasmussen, following him onto the stairs. Never, answered Raskolnikov. I have been meaning to buy a lock for these 2 years. People are happy who have no need of locks, he said, laughing to Sonia. They stood still in the gateway. Poor folk. It's like a joke. Like, you don't lock your house because you don't need to. If some unfortunate son of a gun somehow accidentally finds their way into your house, they'll find that there's nothing to steal. At best and at worst. Okay. Yeah, there's nothing to steal, and at worst lose everything. Just from having the misfortune of breaking into this crap shack. Like, I feel sorry for any guy who tries to go in there. Do you go to the right, Sofia Semyonovna? How do you find me, by the way? He added, as though he wanted to say something quite different. I had the exact same question. Like, how'd she even know where he lived? He wanted to look at her soft, clear eyes, but this was not easy. Why, you gave your address to Polanka yesterday. Polanka? Oh yes, Polanka. That's a little girl. She is your sister. Did I give her the address? Why, had you forgotten? No, I remember. Oh, okay, so yeah, apparently you gave him his address. Oh. I had heard my father speak of you, only I did not know your name, and he did not know it. Well, they met in the bar, and your dad was pretty freaking drunk at the time. And now I came, and as I learnt your name, I asked today, where does Mr. Raskolnikov live? I did not know you had only a room or two. I had only a room too. Goodbye. I will tell Katerina Ivanovna. She was extremely glad to escape at last. She went away looking down, hurrying to get out of sight as soon as possible, to walk the 20 steps to the turning on the right, and to be at last alone. Then moving rapidly along, looking at no one, noticing nothing, to think, to remember, to meditate on every word, every detail. Never, never had she felt anything like this. Dimly and unconsciously, a whole new world was opening before her. She remembered suddenly that Raskolnikov meant to come to her that day, perhaps at once. Only not today, please, not today, she kept muttering with a sinking heart, as though entreating someone like a frightened child. Mercy, to me, to that room, he will see, oh dear. She was not capable at that instant of noticing an unknown gentleman who was watching her and following at her heels. He had accompanied her from the gateway. At the moment when Rasmus and Raskolnikov and she stood still at parting on the pavement, this gentleman, who was just passing, started on hearing Sonia's words, and asked where Mr. Raskolnikov lived. He turned a rapid but attentive look upon all three, especially upon Raskolnikov, to whom Sonia was speaking, then looked back and noted the house. All of this was done an instant as he passed, and trying not to betray his interest, he walked on more slowly as though waiting for something. He was waiting for Sonia. He saw that they were parting and that Sonia was going home. Home? Where? I've seen that face somewhere, he thought. I must find out. At the turning he crossed over, looked around, and saw Sonia coming the same way, noticing nothing. She turned the corner. He followed her on the other side. After about 50 paces, he crossed over again, overtook her, and kept 2 or 3 yards behind her. He was a man about 50, rather tall and thickly set, with broad high shoulders which made him look as though he stooped a little. He wore good and fashionable clothes and looked like a gentleman of position. He carried a handsome cane, which he tapped on the pavement at each step. His gloves were spotless. He had a broad, rather pleasant face with high cheekbones and a fresh color, not often seen in Petersburg. His flaxen hair was still abundant, and only touched here and there with gray, and his thick, square beard was even lighter than his hair. His eyes were blue and had a cold and thoughtful look. His lips were crimson. He was a remarkably well-preserved man, and looked much younger than his years. When Sonia came out on the canal bank, they were the only 2 persons on the pavement. He observed her dreaminess and preoccupation. On reaching the house where she lodged, Sonia turned at the gate. He followed her, seeming rather surprised. In the courtyard, she turned to the right corner. Bah, muttered the unknown gentleman, and mounted the stairs behind her. Only then Sonia noticed him. She reached the 3rd story, turned down the passage, and rang at number 9. On the door was inscribed in chalk, Karpanov, Tailor. Bah, the stranger repeated again, wondering at the strange coincidence. And he rang next door, at number 8. The doors were 2 or 3 yards apart. You lodge at Kapernamov's, he said, looking at Sonia and laughing. He altered a waistcoat for me yesterday. I'm staying close here, Madame Reshlich's. How odd. Sonia looked at him attentively. We're neighbors, he went on gaily. I only came to town the day before yesterday. Goodbye for the present. Sonia made no reply. The door opened and she slipped in. She felt for some reason ashamed and uneasy. On the way to Porfiry's, Rasmussen was obviously excited. That's capital, brother, he repeated several times. And I am glad. What are you glad about? Raskolnikov thought to himself. I didn't know that you pledged things at the old woman's, too. And was it long ago? Was it long since you were there? What a simple-hearted fool he is. When was it? Raskolnikov stopped still to recollect. 2 or 3 days before her death, it must have been. But I'm not going to redeem the things now. He put in with a sort of hurried and conspicuous solicitude about the things. I've not more than a silver ruble left, after last night's accursed delirium. He laid special emphasis on the delirium. Yes, Rasmussen hastened to agree with what was not clear. Then that's why you stuck partly. You know in your delirium you were continually mentioning some rings or chains. Yes, that's clear. It's all clear now. Hello, how that idea must have got among them. Here this man will go to the stake for me, and I find him delighted at having it cleared up why I spoke of rings in my delirium. What a hold the idea must have on all of them. Shall we find him? He asked suddenly. Oh yes, Rasmussen answered quickly. He's a nice fellow, you see, brother. Rather clumsy, that is to say. He's a man of polished manners, but I mean clumsy in a different sense. He's an intelligent fellow, very much so indeed, but he has his own range of ideas. He's incredulous, skeptical, cynical. He likes to impose on people, and rather to make fun of them. His is the old circumstantial method, but he understands his work thoroughly. Last year he cleared up a case of murder in which the police had hardly a clue. He is very, very anxious to make your acquaintance. On what grounds is he so anxious? Oh, it's not exactly. You see, since you've been ill, I have mentioned you several times. So when he heard about you being a law student and not being able to finish your studies, he said, "What a pity." So I concluded from everything together, not only that, yesterday Zamatov, Roja, I talked some nonsense on the way home to you yesterday when I was drunk. I'm afraid, brother, if you're exaggerating it, you see. What, did they think I'm a madman? Maybe they're right, he said with a constrained smile. Yes, that is pooh, no. But all that I said, and there was something else too, it was all nonsense, drunken nonsense. But why are you apologizing? I'm so sick of it all, Raskolnikov cried with exaggerated irritability. It was partly assumed, however. I know, I understand. Believe me, I understand. One's ashamed to speak of it. Raskolnikov is loathsome, Razmin is overbearing. So expect... yeah. It's just to be expected. Both were silent. If you're ashamed, then don't speak of it. Both were silent. Razmin was more than ecstatic, and Raskolnikov proceeded with repulsion. He was alarmed too by what Razmin had just said about Porfiry. I shall have to pull a long face with him too, he thought, with a beating heart, and he turned white. And do it naturally too. But the most natural thing would be to do nothing at all. Carefully do nothing at all. No, carefully would not be natural again. Oh well, we shall see how it turns out. We shall see directly. Is it a good thing to go or not? The butterfly flies to the light. My heart is beating, that's what's bad. In this grey house, said Rasmus. The most important thing, does Porfiry know that I was at the old hag's flat yesterday and asked about the blood? I must find that out instantly. As soon as I go in, find out from his face. Otherwise, I'll find out if it's my ruin. I say, brother, he said, suddenly addressing Rasmus with a sly smile. I have been noticing all day that you seem to be curiously excited. Isn't it so? Excited? Not a bit of it, said Rasmus, stung to the quick. Yes, brother, I assure you it's noticeable. Why, you sat in your chair in a way that you never do sit, on the edge somehow, and you seemed to be writhing all the time. You kept jumping up for nothing. One moment you were angry, and the next your face looked like a sweet meat. You even blushed, especially when you were invited to dinner. You blushed awfully. Nothing of the sort. Nonsense. What do you mean? But why are you wriggling out of it like a schoolboy? By Jove, there's the blushing. There he's blushing again. What a pig you are. But why are you so shamefaced about it? Romeo, stay, I'll tell you today. Ha ha ha. I'll make mother laugh, and someone else too. Listen, this is serious. What next, you fiend? Rasmus was utterly overwhelmed, turning cold with horror. What will you tell them? Come, brother. What a pig you are. You're like a summer rose, and if only you knew how it suits you. A Romeo over 6 foot high. And how you've washed today. You cleaned your nails, I declare. That's something unheard of. Well, I do believe you got pomatum on your hair. Bend down. Pig. Raskolnikov laughed as though he could not restrain himself. So laughing they entered Porfiry Petrovich's flat. This is what Raskolnikov wanted. From within they could be heard laughing as they came in, still guffawing in the passage. Not a word here, or I'll brain you, Razmin whispered furiously, seizing Raskolnikov by the shoulder. Raskolnikov knows that he's in love. Either with his mom or sister. Can he tell yet which one? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, chapter 5 next time. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break before we dive into War and Peace. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching. Thank you for following. If you're watching from YouTube, thank you for subscribing. dive into War and Peace. Chapter 2. Pierre's rose in popularity as a result of inheriting Count Bezukov's fortune. In November 1805, Prince Vasily had to go on a tour of inspection in 4 different provinces. He had arranged this for himself so as to visit his neglected estates at the same time and pick up his son Anatole where his regiment was stationed. Take him to visit Prince Nicholas Bolkonsky in order to arrange a match for him with the daughter of that rich old man. But before leaving home and undertaking these new affairs, Prince Vasily had to settle matters with Pierre, who, it is true, had latterly spent whole days at home, that is, in Prince Vasily's house where he was staying, and had been absurd, excited, and foolish in Helene's presence, as a lover should be, but had not yet proposed to her. This is all very fine, but things must be settled, said Prince Vasily to himself, with a sorrowful sigh, one morning, feeling that Pierre, who was under such obligations to him, but never mind that, was not behaving very well in this matter. Youth, frivolity. Well, God be with him, thought he, relishing his own goodness of heart, but it must be brought to a head. Day after tomorrow will be Lelia's name day. I will invite 2 or 3 people, and if he does not understand what he ought to do, then it will be my affair. Yes, my affair. I am her father. 6 weeks after Anna Pavlovna's at home, and after the sleepless night when he decided that to marry Helene would be a calamity, and that he ought to avoid her and go away, Pierre, despite that decision, had not left Prince Vasily's, and felt with terror that, in people's eyes, he was every day more and more connected with her, that it was impossible for him to return to his former conception of her, that he could not break away from her, and that it would be a terrible thing he would have to unite his fate with hers. He might perhaps have been able to free himself, but that Prince Vasily, who had rarely before given receptions, now hardly let a day go by without having an evening party, at which Pierre had to be present unless he wished to spoil the general pleasure and disappoint everyone's expectation. Prince Vasily, in the rare moments when he was at home, would take Pierre's hand in passing and draw it downwards, or absent-mindedly hold out his wrinkled, clean-shaven cheek for Pierre to kiss, and would say, "Till tomorrow," or "Be in to dinner, or I shall not see you," or "I'm staying in for your sake," and so on. No, Prince Vasily, when he stayed in, as he said, for Pierre's sake, hardly exchanged a couple of words with him. Pierre felt unable to disappoint him. Every day he said to himself one and the same thing. It's time I understood her and made up my mind what she really is. Was I mistaken before, or am I mistaken now? No, she's not stupid. She's an excellent girl, he sometimes said to himself. She never makes a mistake, never says anything stupid. She says little, but what she does say is always clear and simple, so she is not stupid. She never was abashed, and is not abashed now, so she cannot be a bad woman. He had often begun to make reflections or think aloud in her company, and he had always answered him either by a brief but appropriate remark, showing that it did not interest her, or by a silent look and smile which more palpably than anything else showed Pierre her superiority. She was right in regarding all arguments as nonsense in comparison with that smile. She always addressed him with a radiantly confiding smile meant for him alone, in which there was something more significant than in the general smile that usually brightened her face. Pierre knew that everyone was waiting for him to say a word and cross a certain line, and he knew that sooner or later he would step across it. But an incomprehensible terror seized him at the thought of that dreadful step. 1,000 times during that month and a half, while he felt himself drawn nearer and nearer to that dreadful abyss, Pierre said to himself, "What am I doing? I need resolution. Can it be that I have none?" He wished to take a decision, but felt with dismay that in this matter he lacked that strength of will which he had known in himself and really possessed. Pierre was one of those who are only strong when they feel themselves quite innocent. Since that day when he was overpowered by a feeling of desire while stooping over the snuff box at Anna Pavlovna's, an unacknowledged sense of the guilt of that desire paralyzed his will. On Helene's name day, a small party of just their own people, as his wife said, met for supper at Prince Vasily's. All these friends and relations had been given to understand that the fate of the young girl would be decided that evening. The visitors were seated at supper. Princess Karegina, a portly, imposing woman who had once been handsome, was sitting at the head of the table. Pierre's got money now, so yeah, he can practically marry whoever he wants. Like, it's really not going to matter all that much. On either side of her sat the more important guests, an old general and his wife, and Anna Pavlovna Scherer. At the other end sat the younger and less important guests. And there too sat the members of the family, Pierre and Helene, side by side. Prince Vasily was not having any supper. He went round the table in a merry mood, sitting down now by one, now by another of the guests. To each of them he made some careless and agreeable remark, except to Pierre and Helene, whose presence he seemed not to notice. He enlivened the whole party. The wax candles burned brightly, the silver and crystal gleamed. So did the ladies' toilets and the gold and silver of the men's epaulets. Servants in scarlet liveries moved around the table. The clatter of plates, knives, and glasses mingled with the animated hum of several conversations. At one end of the table, the old chamberlain was heard assuring an old baroness that he loved her passionately, at which she laughed. The other end could be heard a story of the misfortunes of some Mary Viktorovna or other. At the center of the table, Prince Vasily attracted everybody's attention. With a facetious smile on his face, he was telling the ladies about last Wednesday's meeting of the Imperial Council, at which Sergei Kuzmich Vyazmitov, the new military governor general of Petersburg, had received and read the then famous rescript of the Emperor Alexander from the army to Sergei Kuzmich, which the emperor said that he was receiving from all sides declarations of the people's loyalty, that the declaration from Petersburg gave him particular pleasure, and that he was proud to be at the head of such a nation, and would endeavor to be worthy of it. This rescript began with the words, Sergei Kuzmich, from all sides and reports reach me, etc. Well, and so he never got farther than Sergei Kuzmich, asked one of the ladies. Exactly not a hair's breadth farther, answered Prince Vasily, laughing. Sergei Kuzmich, from all sides, Sergei Kuzmich. Poor Vyazmitov could not get any farther. He began the rescript again and again, but as soon as he uttered Sergei, he stopped. Kuzmich, tears, and from all sides was smothered in sobs and could get no farther. Again his handkerchief, and again Sergei Kuzmich from all sides, and tears till last somebody else was asked to read it. Okay. Kuzmich from all sides, and then tears. Someone repeated, laughing. Don't be unkind, cried Anna Pavlovna from her end of the table, holding up a threatening finger. He's such a worthy and excellent man, our dear Vyazmitov. Everybody laughed a great deal. At the head of the table where the honored guests sat, everyone seemed to be in high spirits, and under the influence of a variety of exciting sensations. Okay. Only Pierre and Helene sat silently side by side, almost at the bottom of the table, and a suppressed smile brightening both their faces, a smile that had nothing to do with Sergei Kuzmich, a smile of bashfulness at their own feelings. But much as all the rest laughed, talked, and joked, much as they enjoyed their Rhine wines, sauté, and ices, however they avoided looking at the young couple, and heedless and unobservant as they seemed to them, one could feel by the occasional glances they gave that the story about Sergei Kuzmich, the laughter, and the food were all pretense, that the whole attention of that company was directed to Pierre and Helene. Prince Vasily mimicked the sobbing of Sergei Kuzmich, and at the same time his eyes glanced toward his daughter. And while he laughed, the expression on his face clearly said, yes, it's getting on, it will all be settled today. He's like, I cannot wait for this rich boy to marry my daughter so we can get some money in this family. As I said yesterday, like that was the whole mindset back then. Pride and Prejudice. It's like you just marry rich. That's all it takes. Okay. Anna Pavlovna threatened him on behalf of our dear Vyazmitov. I know I said that wrong. Vyazmitov. And in her eyes, which for an instant glanced at Pierre, Prince Vasily read a congratulation on his future son-in-law, and on his daughter's happiness. The old princess sighed sadly as she offered some wine to the old lady next to her, and glanced angrily at her daughter. and her sigh seemed to say, "Yes, there's nothing left for you and me but to sip sweet wine, my dear. Now that the time has come for these young ones to be thus boldly, provocatively happy. What nonsense all this is that I'm saying," thought a diplomatist, glancing at the happy faces of the lovers. "That's happiness." Into this insignificant, trifling, and artificial interests uniting that society had entered the simple feeling of the attraction of a healthy and handsome young man and a woman for one another. This human feeling dominated everything else and soared above all other affected chatter. It just fell flat. It was just not interesting. And the animation was evidently forced. Not only the guests, but even the footmen waiting at the table seemed to feel this, and they forgot their duties as they looked at the beautiful Helene and her radiant face, and at the red, broad, and happy though uneasy face of Pierre. It seemed as if the very light of the candles was focused on these two happy faces alone. Pierre felt that he was the center of it all, and this both pleased and embarrassed him. He was like a man entirely absorbed in some occupation. He did not see, hear, or understand anything clearly. Only now and then detached ideas and impressions from the world of reality shot unexpectedly through his mind. So it's all finished, he thought. And how has it all happened? How quickly? Now I know that not because of her alone, nor of myself alone, but because of everyone. It must be inevitably come about. They're all expecting it. They're all so sure that it will happen that I cannot disappoint them. But how will it be? I do not know, but it will certainly happen, thought Pierre, glancing at those dazzling shoulders close to his eyes. You just gotta be a man, Pierre. Like man up, propose, ain't no thing, but chicken wing. He'd suddenly feel ashamed of he knew not what. He felt it awkward to attract everyone's attention and to be considered a lucky man, and with his plain face, he looked to be on so Pierre's possession of Helen. No doubt it is always his, and must be so, he consoled himself. Besides, what have I done to bring it about? How did it begin? I traveled from Moscow with Prince Vasily. Then there was nothing, so why should I not stay at his house? Then I played cards with her and picked up her reticule and drove out with her. How did it begin, and when did it all come about? And here was sitting by her side as her betrothed, seeing, hearing, feeling her nearness, her breathing, her movements, her beauty. Then it would suddenly seem to him that it was not she, but he who was so unusually beautiful. That was why they all looked so at him, and flattered by this general admiration, he would expand his chest, raise his head, and rejoice at his good fortune. Suddenly he heard a familiar voice repeating something to him a second time, but Pierre was so absorbed that he did not understand what was said. "I'm asking you when you last heard from Bolkonsky," repeated Prince Vasily a third time. "How absent-minded you are, my dear fellow." Prince Vasily smiled, and Pierre noticed that everyone was smiling at him and Helene. "Well, what of it, if you all know it?" thought Pierre. "What of it? It's the truth." And he himself smiled his gentle, childlike smile, and Helene smiled too. "When did you get the letter? Was it from Olmutz?" repeated Prince Vasily, who pretended to want to know this in order to settle a dispute. How can one talk or think of such trifles, thought Pierre. "Yes, from Olmutz," he answered with a sigh. After supper, Pierre with his partner followed the others into the drawing room. The guests began to disperse, some without taking leave of Helene. Some, as if unwilling to distract her from an important occupation, came up to her for a moment and made haste to go away, refusing to let her see them off. The diplomatist preserved a mournful silence as he left the drawing room. He pictured the vanity of his diplomatic career in comparison with Pierre's happiness. The old general grumbled at his wife when she asked how his leg was. "Oh, the old fool," he thought. "The Princess Helene will be beautiful still when she's 50. "I think I may congratulate you," whispered Anna Pavlovna to the old princess, kissing her soundly. "If I hadn't this headache, I'd have stayed longer." The old princess did not reply. She was tormented by jealousy of her daughter's happiness. While the guests were taking their leave, Pierre remained for a long time alone with Helene in the little drawing room where they were sitting. He'd often before, during their last 6 weeks, remained alone with her, but had never spoken to her of love. Now he felt that it was inevitable, but he could not make up his mind to take the final step. He felt ashamed. He felt that he was occupying someone else's place beside Helene. "This happiness is not for you," some inner voice whispered to him. "This happiness is for those who have not in them what there is in you." But as he had to say something, he began by asking her whether she was satisfied with the party. "Don't be ridiculous, Pierre. You're young, you're rich. Life is for you to live. It is not for the old and it's not for the poor. So, just live it. You don't matter. You don't matter at all. She replied in her usual simple manner that this name day of hers had been one of the pleasantest she had ever had. Some of the nearest relatives had not yet left. They were sitting in the large drawing room. Prince Vasily came up to Pierre with languid footsteps. Pierre rose and said it was getting late. Prince Vasily gave him a look of stern inquiry, as though what Pierre had just said was so strange that one could not take it in. Then the expression of severity changed, and he drew Pierre's hand downwards, made him sit down, and smiled affectionately. Well, Lelia? He asked, turning instantly to his daughter, and addressing her with the careless tone of habitual tenderness natural to parents who petted their children from babyhood, but which Prince Vasily had only acquired by imitating other parents. He again turned to Pierre. Sergei Kuzmich, from all sides, he said, unbuttoning the top of his waistcoat. Pierre smiled, but his smile showed that he knew it was not the story about Sergei Kuzmich that interested Prince Vasily just then. And Prince Vasily saw that Pierre knew this. He suddenly muttered something and went away. It seemed to Pierre that even the prince was disconcerted. The sight of the discomposure of that old man of the world touched Pierre. He looked at Helene, and she too seemed disconcerted, and her look seemed to say, well, it's your own fault. The step must be taken, but I cannot, thought Pierre, and he again began speaking about indifferent matters, about Sergei Kuzmich, about what the point of the story was, as he had not heard it properly. Helene answered with a smile that she too had missed it. When Prince Vasily returned to the drawing room, the princess's wife was talking in low tones to the elderly lady about Pierre. Of course, it's a brilliant match, but happiness, my dear. Marriages are made in heaven, replied the elderly lady. Prince Vasily passed by, seeming not to hear the ladies, and sat down on the sofa in a far corner of the room. He closed his eyes and seemed to be dozing. His head sank forward, and then he roused himself. Helene, he said to his wife, go and see what they are about. The princess went up to the door, passed by it with a dignified and indifferent air, and glanced into the little drawing room. Pierre and Helene still sat, talking just as before. Still the same, she said to her husband. Prince Vasily frowned, twisted his mouth, his cheeks quivered, and his face assumed the coarse, unpleasant expression peculiar to him. Shaking himself, he rose, threw back his head, and with resolute steps went past the ladies into the little drawing room. With quick steps, he went joyfully up to Pierre. His face was so unusually triumphant that Pierre rose in alarm on seeing it. Thank God, said Prince Vasily. My wife has told me everything. He put one arm around Pierre and the other around his daughter. My dear boy, Lelia, I'm very pleased. His voice trembled. I love your father, and she will make you a good wife. God bless you. He embraced his daughter and then again Pierre and kissed him with his malodorous mouth. Tears actually moistened his cheeks. Malodorous is seemingly very unpleasant. Okay. The old princess came in and also wept. The elderly lady was using her handkerchief too. Pierre was kissed, and he kissed the beautiful Helene's hand several times. After a while, they were left alone again. All this had to be and could not be otherwise, thought Pierre, so it's useless to ask whether it's good or bad. It is good because it's definite, and one is rid of the old tormenting doubt. Pierre held the hand of his betrothed in silence, looking at her beautiful bosom as it rose and fell. Helene, he said aloud and paused. Something special is always said in such cases, he thought, but could not remember what it was that people say. He looked at her face. She drew near to him. Her face flushed. Oh, take those off. Those, she said, pointing to his spectacles. Pierre took them off, and his eyes, beside the strange look eyes have from which spectacles have just been removed, had also a frightened and inquiring look. He was about to stoop over her hand and kiss it, but with a rapid, almost brutal movement of her head, she intercepted his lips and met them with her own. Her face struck Pierre by its altered, unpleasantly excited expression. It's too late now. It's done. Besides, I love her, thought Pierre. Je vous aime, he said, remembering what has to be said at such moments, meaning I love you. but his words sounded so weak that he felt ashamed of himself. 6 weeks later, he was married, settled in Count Bezukov's large, newly furnished Petersburg house. The happy possessor, as people said, of a wife who was a celebrated beauty and of millions of money. Leo, Leo, Leo. Chapter 2. Chapter 3 will concern ourselves more with the ramblings of silly rich folk. Yeah, I'd say I definitely preferred Crime and Punishment to War and Peace. Shorter. Characters are more relatable. They're not stupid rich jerks. It's not a bunch of politics and mamby-pamby stuff. But, I don't know. Hope you've enjoyed this series, the Russian author series. Don't forget to follow. Thank you for the view. Thank you for the like. Thank you for the sub. Thank you for the donation. Stormer Show signing out.